the first step was just seeing what I could learn about what other people are doing and have done. At that point, I was serving as an interim pastor. And as I was approaching the end, I started thinking even more about church planting. And one of the people who had been attending the church wound up going to prison right at about the time that I completed that interim pastorate. So as an interim, you don't do follow-up pastoral work with the congregation, but he wasn't a member, nobody else was there to do it, and I checked with our clerk of session and the presbytery stated clerk, fine, visit the person in prison, which I did. And one of the things, and he was gay, one of the things we talked about was, and he brought up was, that there's a huge community there that is totally unreached by the church and feel very unwelcome. Even though a church might say, come on in, glad to have you, it didn't feel at home to them, and so they weren't coming, and their previous experience, if they had any with the church at all, had been, in many cases, very traumatic and hard for them. Yeah, it felt like it was for somebody else, and that they were very much an outsider, and they felt not comfortable there. So
what did you do?
Well, the thing was then to go where they are, and so we were careful. We didn't meet in a church. We met at first we met in a community room in an apartment where one of them lived, and that was available to us, no cost for resident having meetings. And so it was a safe place for people to come to who would have felt uncomfortable, some of them, going into a church building. The contact with individuals who came were by them. Like the first person I talked to, the one who had been in prison, had a lot of contacts. This is after he was out of prison. And he made contacts, invited people to come. And they came, and then they would invite others to come.
So what were those first meetings like? This obviously, in some ways, a different ministry than probably you or any of us had engaged in.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Well, the first meeting and several of the first meetings was defining what we were and our expectations initially. And I wanted to be very upfront and honest. I didn't want to hide the fact that I was hoping that at some point there would be the development of a faith community. I didn't use that language because that would not be understood necessarily. But, and ask them about their feelings. The first few meetings, it was a talking about what had been their experiences early with the church and their friends' experiences, and what did they think about Jesus? Because those are two different questions for this group. So those first meetings, there was talk about struggles they had with those early days in their lives, not only with the church, but also with their families. That came through very deeply and emotionally from them, and also in classes and times when they had been bullied, or in one case stabbed several times, and so there were deep emotional sharing of what it was like. One of the young guys said, well, I went to this church and and I knew what they were teaching, and so when I finally came out, I said to my mom, well, Mom, I'm going to hell. And she said, because I'm gay, and she said, yes, you are. And it was hard for him. I mean, he's still living with struggles like that. And this group was talking about we needed to be a place where this can be shared in a safe way. At first, it was almost, you know, I hadn't set out to create a therapy group, and but it was never a therapy group or a support group, but it was close to that, especially in that and maybe just that in the early stages. But we also introduced questions about where is God in all this? What do you think about it? What about Jesus? And there was great there's great spiritual interest, and in some cases they would say, well, I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic. In other cases there was clearly a yearning to, they had something in this church that had rejected them, they felt. There was something there. There were at least the hints of the gospel that meant something very deep, and all
so
of that.
Even though the church was off-putting, the gospel was finding its way through in spite of the church.
Yeah, yeah, and well, different people would respond differently that way, but for many of them, you could say yes, they are aware of a need that they have in terms of relationship or a lacking of a relationship with God, or wondering if God is there. So we wanted to be a group that was safe in terms of what they would say about coming out and their family experiences, and safe in what they would say or ask about God, Jesus, the church, so that if somebody would say, I don't believe, I'm really angry at the church or angry at God, that it would be a safe place where they could say that and not be rejected.
What were these meetings like? I mean, how did the flow of one of these meetings go?
They've changed. They change over time as we have been meeting, and I always plan out how they might work out, and yet the group and introduce something to the group. But what actually happens depends on where the group is going and where the group's needs are. So I will often come in and I'll have a scripture story that I felt would be relevant and really hitting on needs that came up maybe at the last meeting. Sometimes we never get to that because other sharing is taking place, which is very deep, and sometimes we do. And at first, I didn't come with the Bible and read a passage. I told the story. Now we've been meeting a number of times, and I'll sometimes print it out, and at our recent meeting, people shared in the reading of it. It would help them to say something about who they were as a group. And so we talked about them, and the key points there that came up in the core values statements were safe place, accepting of people from those who had faith, those who didn't have faith, those who were wondering, those who rejected. They would be welcome, and it would be a safe place to talk about this. In my initial gathering with them, and the reason for going there, I wanted to be able to reach out to people who didn't have, were not following any doctrinal guidelines, were not part of a church, and didn't feel comfortable there. So I wanted them to have a place where they were comfortable and could talk about the big questions. Is there a God? Why would God allow something like this to happen? Is there someone who loves me? In talking about that, they began to become very supportive of one another and helpful to one another, and also very concerned about other people who weren't there, who were gay, who needed some of the kinds of sharing that we were doing. So they wanted to reach out to other people. They were interested in being evangelists before they knew anything about what what the message would be in a way. They did care about reaching out to other people with needs.